a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Genesis. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store. And so Jacob, he comes and he has a family meeting, and he calls Rachel and Leah, and he tells them, he says, your father's getting unfriendly to me. And they knew their father, and so they knew that their father had been changing their wages because they've probably been hearing about it every night when Jacob comes home. And so Jacob tells them, I haven't taken Laban's flocks, but God, he wouldn't let Laban hurt me. And God's the one who's given me the flocks of Laban. And then Jacob tells them of that dream that he had when Laban would change the wages and how God had given all the sheep by changing the colors of the sheep. And he tells him, he says, God is now calling me home. But what I really like about this dream that he had is the way that God tells Jacob of who he is. And he tells Jacob, he goes, I'm the God of Bethel, the one you anointed the pillar to. And so now God, he takes Jacob in his mind and he brings him 20 years back to that point where Jacob had surrendered his life to God. And he tells him, he goes, that place where you made a vow to me. And I'll tell you, God has done that so many times in my life, where he's taken me back to that time where I surrendered my life to him. So I love that, how he says, I am the God of Bethel, because God, he could have described himself to Jacob in many ways. He could have said, oh, the God of your fathers, oh, the God of Abraham and Isaac, but he didn't. He described himself as Jacob's God, the one that made promises to Jacob. And so Rachel and Leah, they answer Jacob and they say, there's nothing here for us. There's no inheritance. Laban sold us and then he spent all the money, and he doesn't care for us. He considers us strangers. So Jacob's wives are in agreement with Jacob in the leaving. And that's wonderful. When a husband and their wife, most of us don't have wives, but when they have this kind of agreement, because it's a confirmation in God's plans for your life. Because even if everything goes wrong, at least it goes wrong and you're together in it. And there's another thing where, like, I hear Rachel and Leah saying how Laban had completely consumed the money. And it kind of makes you wonder here, is Laban broke now? Did Laban lose everything in these last 6 years? Did he spend everything? Because they say there's no inheritance left. And maybe that's why his sons are more envious of Jacob, because there's nothing left. And that could be because Laban, he only trusted in his little gods, which were more like his good luck charms, but they're not the real God who has real power to change things. And so Jacob and his wives, they planned their getaway. And Rachel, she stole those worthless little gods, and they waited to leave until Laban went to go shear his sheep. And you have to remember that Laban and his sons and his flocks, they live 3 days away. So when they leave, Jacob and his family, they all get up on their new camels, but they still couldn't travel real fast because they're driving all these flocks of sheep and goats. They get pretty far before Laban catches up with them, because those mountains of Gilead where Laban found them, well, they were over 300 miles away. They were 300 miles from Haran. And so Jacob, he made really good time because he's traveled that far in just 10 days. And they're really not that far from the Jordan River in the land of Canaan. But see, Laban, he's not driving cattle. And you can travel a lot faster when you're only traveling with some men, which sounds more like it's kind of like a posse, so that they can overcome Jacob and they can take away all his possessions. And that was what was going to happen. But the only thing that stopped him was God, because God terrified Laban in that dream. And he warned him not to say neither good nor bad to Jacob. So Laban, he shows up. And when he shows up, he tries to shame Jacob. And God lets that slide, because remember, he's not supposed to say anything bad about Jacob, but he kind of does. He tries to shame him. And then he tells Jacob of what a wonderful party that he was going to throw for him. But then Laban, he revealed his own intent in his next words, where he threatens Jacob and he says, "It's in my power to do you harm." So Jacob, he didn't misjudge Uncle Laban. And then Laban accuses Jacob of stealing his teraphim, his little idols, his gods, his little action figures. And all these commentators, they agree that it's a sad thing when your gods can be stolen. And if your gods can be stolen, it means you're serving the wrong gods, that they're way too small. And so Jacob, he lets Laban search through everything, all the possessions, and he goes in everybody's tent, because he doesn't think anybody stole anything. And then this curse, Jacob, he pronounces, and he pronounces it on the thief, to kill whoever you find with your idols. And it kind of makes you wonder, it makes me wonder, if that's why Rachel dies not too long from this journey. Because even though Laban doesn't find them, that God sees everything. And God knows that Rachel, that she stole them. And Rachel, she says, well, I can't get up off my camel, because she's telling him that she's menstruating. But she's sitting on his little gods. And again, if your gods are so small that you can actually sit on them, you have the wrong gods. And then you got to ask yourself, why did Rachel steal those gods? Well, were they still her gods too? Because they are the gods that she grew up with. Or was she just trying to get back at her father because of how he treated her? Because you have to realize, he stole her husband and gave him to her sister. And the Jewish writers, they have a lot of compassion on Rachel, because they see her as one of the women that had carried them. And so I think they might be a little prejudiced here, but they say that she stole them to keep her father away from idolatry. But I suspect that Rachel, that she actually saw them as good luck charms too. And maybe that was something that she was looking for fertility and for prosperity. And it's hard to say what she was thinking. But she didn't tell Jacob that she stole them. And then after Laban, and after he doesn't find anything, Jacob unloads on him. He's had it. And he unleashes 20 years of frustration and pent-up anger. And the things that Jacob says here, they show how much Jacob has served him well. And he's never done anything wrong. And it shows what he suffered under Laban. And the thing is, they should have had a wonderful relationship, because they were family. So when I look at Jacob here, and I know he's criticized by a lot of people, but I do not see him as the same kind of man that he was when he left Canaan. I think that after Bethel, when he committed his life to God, he became a better man. He didn't become a perfect man, but a better one. And I don't blame Jacob for stealing away in the middle of the night to flee Laban, because I do think Laban considered killing Jacob and taking all his possession unless the Lord intervened. And so now we have Laban, we have him here, and he's standing around with all his brothers and all his sons and all the men that he brought with him. And he's looking at Jacob's possessions, and he's saying, that's mine. Those daughters, those are mine. Those grandchildren, those are mine. Those flocks are mine. mine, mine, mine. And he knows that there's nothing that he can do about it. And he says, well, what can I do? But you see, now he's afraid of God. So that dream must have been very terrifying, because he knows what God will do to him if he doesn't let Jacob go. And so he goes and he acts as if he's generous and that he's giving it all to Jacob. And it's just like he pretended to be generous when he's saying he was giving his daughter Rachel to him when he worked for about 14 years of labor. But even after all this, it's really nice to see that Jacob's heart, it's not jaded by Laban. Even after all these years of mistreatment and all the deceit, that Jacob, that he's willing to have peace with him and to make a treaty with him. And so they say they gather all these rocks and they make a pile. And then Jacob, he sets up a rock like a pillar, the same way that he did over there in Bethel. And then they eat on top of that pile of rocks, and they have the terms of their treaty, because they always make their contracts by eating a meal. And so this pile of rocks and this pillar, they're supposed to be the witness of this covenant that they're making. And they use this word Mizpah, and it's where Jacob and Laban are calling on the Lord to be a witness and to watch between them while they're away from each other. And Christians, they have used this word many times as a blessing to other Christians when they're leaving, for the Lord to watch over us while we're away from each other. Mizpah, like it's a sweet blessing. But that's not what it means at all. It's not a blessing, because what they're really asking the Lord to do here is to watch this line that they've made with this pillar of rocks, this pillar and this pile of rocks. And they're saying, if you cross this line, you dirty, rotten crook, the treaty's over, the deal's off, and I'm going to kill you. So it really wasn't this big warm hug and kiss on the cheek goodbye. And then Laban, he threatens Jacob about taking other wives. But Jacob, he never wanted anybody more than Rachel. That's all he ever wanted. He only wanted one wife. And so they have all this threatening and all this cursing, and everybody's calling on their gods. And then after that's all done, Jacob shows them hospitality, and he makes a sacrifice for them. And what that means is that they had a barbecue. He's blessing them. He's making a sacrifice, and he's blessing them with a good meal, and they all get a good night's rest. And so Jacob allows Laban to have this nice goodbye of peace with his daughters, and this nice time of saying goodbye in peace with his grandchildren. Because you see, it's a little hard when you stay with your in-laws for 20 years. 20 years is just a little bit too long. But you can see through all this that God is doing a great work in Jacob, but he's not finished with him yet, because God is still shaping him, and he's molding him to be the man that God's called him to be, because he's going to be Israel, which means a man governed by God. And it's just like God does in our lives. And when we find ourselves submitted to God's will, and we find ourselves governed by God.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.